Hey everybody, welcome to tonight's stream. Let us know where you're from in the chat. Just getting my screen set up here. All right, so last night's debate had a lot of policy substance, unlike the week before. So I want to get right down to it because I think there's a lot of sort of different intricacies to talk about. So Sean Jacobson is our host. He is our CompGov teacher at Fivebowl. Sign up for CompGov. If you haven't signed up already, he's going to be the teacher. And feel free to put your questions in the chat while he's talking. And he'll pause between each topic and check for questions. So I'll keep an eye on the chat and then let him know what questions you all have. So Sean, take it away.
Great, sounds good. So, okay. If you haven't already, sign up for, the Think Fiveable on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, all that stuff. You're here, so I'm guessing you already have. Here's the topics that they talked about last night. There was the coronavirus, there's the role of the presidency, election integrity, the economy, climate change, China, the Supreme Court, and then there was a Breonna Taylor / racial relations / law enforcement. And then there was a question from the 8th grader, which, was interesting. Obviously, it had plexiglass there. There was, they were 12 feet apart, and that was, a new way of doing this. There were people in the audience. I still don't know why. They were there. And the very famous thing that came out from Kamala Harris was, I'm speaking. She's, she said every time that Mike Pence interrupted her, I'm speaking, which was powerful. And then obviously there was a fly. Can't get past the fly. The fly was kind of the star of last night. But we got to talk about, the American policies for government, because you can't vote for a fly. All right. So when it comes to the coronavirus, probably the biggest thing that people will vote on. I mean, that depends, maybe not, but I think it's probably the biggest thing. So Kamala Harris said right now, 1 out of every 5 businesses are closed because of this, that Trump lacked enactment and did not act early and effective enough. He said, he got all the information in January and didn't do much until, I think until the NBA shut down. It seemed like that was the big one. And then all of a sudden everything happened. Then, Trump also called it a hoax. And, she said, well, Pence doesn't have a plan. Whereas Pence was saying, he was defending Trump because he acted on day one by enacting that travel ban by Congress, should have capitalized Congress. That mobilization saved hundreds of thousands of lives, according to Mike Pence. And that they have been advancing that medical technology and quicker than possibly ever before. That is what Mike Pence has been saying about that. All right. So then we got to the roles of the vice president, and this is where things started being about other things. So we're not going to really talk too much about that. But Harris talked about her background, being that she's the first African-American woman to potentially hold that position. She's the second African-American woman who's ever been elected to the Senate. And she discussed her shared interests with Biden. She talked about how she was a district attorney in California and things like that. And then Pence made it about the failures of Vice President Biden as vice president. He was saying that, he completely failed in regards to swine flu. And that was if he took that leadership the same way he did with swine flu, it would result in far more deaths than have happened. One of the last things they talked about, but we're kind of putting it up here just to combine it, was about election integrity. Harris has said they have the broadest coalition in any presidential race, which includes Republicans such as Colin Powell, Cindy McCain, who's the wife of John McCain, John Kasich, who's the governor. I don't think he's former. I think he's he's former governor because Mike DeWine is governor. Former governor of Ohio, 500 plus generals, former national security experts, and that in last week's debate, Kamala Harris is claiming, saying Donald Trump openly attempted to suppress the vote. Whereas Mike Pence is saying those supporting Biden are part of the Washington, D.C. establishment, and that's what the Trump Pence ticket is against. They're against that establishment thing. So, and they're saying they stand with law enforcement the men and women of the law enforcement every single day, and that is a big part of their coalition. They are very proud of that. And Mike Pence is saying, what's happening now for the Republicans is larger than it was in 2016, where obviously, that carried them to victory. Going to find out in 26 days.
Yeah,
who's
or
right about
so.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, 26 to 56 days.
Right. Yeah.
And
I
that
have
might
a
be a low
question
ball.
about this one.
Yeah.
And then maybe that'll give people some time to think about if they have
Sure.
questions. So the election integrity question was posed in a way that I found confusing, and I wondered if the moderator was trying to sort of like get them to talk about something else. Like specifically, the moderator was like, if it's a contentious election, what will you do as vice president? And
Right.
I didn't really understand why she was asking that. Like, if there was a contentious election, what even could a vice president?
Yeah, they really, I mean, the only job according to the Constitution is to, take over if the president is ill or, cannot serve, and to break a tie in the Senate. There's really not there's really not much a vice president can do ever, let alone in, in this. So it's kind of like saying, hey, you can't do anything, but what would you do?
Okay.
I don't know.
Cool. I'll let you move on, but if you're not seeing it, there's lots of shout outs to you in the chat. People are saying, thank you so much for making this PowerPoint in such a short amount of time. It's so helpful. And they're just showering you with appreciation. So,
oh, no, absolutely. Look, I love this. This is something that I love. And as I said before, I take this pretty seriously. And I like doing these. I don't know why. It's kind of sad.
You're distilling a lot of information for us. It's really helpful.
Well, I know we have a time limit, so I want to get the questions more than just me reading off a PowerPoint. Okay, so yeah, so the last night was Susan Page from the Washington chief from USA Today. Had a different kind of vibe, all that. Okay, so the economy. Harris is talking about how the current Trump tax plan benefits high earners, and that she is saying that the Biden-Harris tax plan won't put a new tax on people making less than $400,000. And then discuss talking about, making giving college access to those making less than $125,000 and talking about it being free. I live in New York City. Something that we have here is something called the Excelsior program, where that is a program that we have. So that resonated with me as saying, oh, we have that. Maybe other people would have that too under this plan. Mike Pence calls the 2009 crisis the slowest recovery since the Great Depression, which is echoing something that Trump said last week. He's saying that the Trump tax cut equaled $2,000 a year for the average family of four. So, if you were to take that away, there's $2,000 that you're taking away from people, which at the end of the day is money in people's pockets. And then he started going into it was interesting. He was kind of leading into what the next topic would be without knowing what the next topic would be. So I think Susan Page in some ways appreciated that, but so he's saying Biden and Harris want to abolish fossil fuels, specifically like fracking and stuff like that, and create a Green New Deal, which is a very controversial thing. Republicans are pretty not thrilled about some of the ideas that come out of that. So there's that.
I have a Green New Deal question.
Oh yeah.
Which is sort of
teacher, I love science questions.
Yeah. So I just remember that last week, Biden specifically was like, I do not endorse the Green New Deal.
Right.
Yeah.
But what got a little tricky this time was with Kamala Harris. She co-sponsored it on the Senate side. So there's no way you can deny having some bit of connection to that. In that. So she's not really able to deny wanting that. She didn't bring up the Biden Green New Deal plan either, which Biden brought up last week. So that was Interesting.
Yeah,
To-
that's where I got confused because she didn't take that moment to like highlight his plan. Who knows?
right. Keep going or
Do you
stop?
know any details of the Biden plan? There is a question about the Biden plan. I'll look it up while you're doing
Yeah,
it.
if you like
Yeah.
social studies.
Yeah. I'll
That
look
I'm
it
good
up.
with. Science, you're good. I did a lot of Googling today
Yeah.
into websites I've never heard of. Science. And here we go, science. So, perfect segue. Climate change. Harris says they will not ban fracking. And, I put something on the bottom about that. The Biden campaign has said they will have put a limited ban on fracking on federally controlled land. So mostly national parks and things like that as to where they would ban fracking. So that's kind of like, it's kind of a lie, and at the same time, it's kind of an unspecific truth. So, you could obviously debate the difference between those two. They're interested in investing in renewable energy, creating millions of jobs, becoming net zero emissions by 2050 and carbon neutral by 2035. Yes, I can explain fracking. That I could do because I've had to before. But also, go on Google just to make sure. So there's something called shale rock, and in shale rock exists gas of some sort. And what they have to do is they have to pour water into that to make it separate so they can extract the fossil fuel from that, which is a process, but it is a new way of getting fossil fuels that it wasn't as easy to do before. The problem is, or what people complain, or who are against it say, is that it has been increasing the amount of earthquakes. So a place like Oklahoma, which is not on a fault line, has had significant amount of earthquakes, which is rare and weird because they're not on a fault line. So they're saying there's an aspect to that. But fracking is a big deal because Pennsylvania does a lot of fracking. Ohio does a lot of fracking. And if you take an AP US Gov or a US government class, you understand that Pennsylvania and Ohio are incredibly important because they're swing states. Pennsylvania has 20 electoral votes and Ohio has 23, somewhere 23 to 29. We're talking big value states for the Electoral College. So, yeah, so that's fracking 101, like maybe 100.
And those are two states that tend to be like sort of purple. Like sometimes
Yeah,
go
they are
red,
swing
sometimes they go
states.
blue.
Yeah, they're swing states to the fullest. And, right now there's polling about those states, but polls and actuality are two completely different things.
Right.
So, it's important to look at the polls, but it's not important to act, and say things are over because of that. Pence is proud of their record on the environment and conservation, claiming that the air and land are cleaner than at any time recorded. President Trump just signed an Outdoors Act, which is the largest, typo, investment in public lands and parks in 100 years. So that would pretty much be back to the creation of the national park system. And then Biden and attacking Biden and Harris for wanting to be part of the Paris Climate Accord. At one time there were only 3 countries in the world that weren't part of it, and it's the U.S., Syria, and North Korea. So that's not really good company. But at the same time, what Pence was saying was that we have done a better job not being in the Paris Accord, and that people have left that because we're not in it. So that's an important aspect. As far as climate change, what I could find, and I spent a good hour researching this, is that the American Association for the Advancement of Science, AAAS, is the world's largest multidisciplinary scientific society. So they're pretty big. They have over 500,000 members. They have stated that based on well-established evidence, about 97% of climate scientists have concluded that human-caused climate change is happening. So 97% of people, that's a pretty large thing. You do hear from the 3% quite a bit. But 97% is larger than 3% basic math. Any questions about this science?
The only question we had, I see, is about the claim of the Outdoors Act being the largest investment in public lands and parks in 100 years. That would be kind of hard to fact check because you would have to do a lot of math to figure out inflation.
Yeah, that and what
know,
I would imagine is, I'm sure it is the largest investment in public lands and parks in 100 years that is directed towards a specific thing. Like there's probably
Right.
some other caveat to that makes that true,
right.
Which is a very typical political, point to make. Like, yeah, no, that's true if you add this to it.
Right.
So, I think you'd have to find out what the adding of this is to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Next, China. They talked about China, and then they, kind of went to American leadership after that. Harris is claiming that Trump lost the trade war with China, that we lost 300,000 jobs to China, whereas Pence is blaming China for coronavirus. He is calling Biden a cheerleader for China. He said that Biden thought suspending travel to and from China in January was xenophobic, because that's what Biden said. And they're saying they're going to hold China responsible for the coronavirus, and they will absolutely stand up to China. Not really specific with that, but they will stand up to China. So then they talked about American leadership in 2020 and went through and said, okay, Harris said Biden believes, and this was her exact quote, foreign policy, it might sound complicated, but it really comes down to relationships. People who have stood with you, you have to stand with them. You got to know who your adversaries are and keep them in check. So that was her quote regarding Biden, about how American leadership should work around the world. And then Pence was talking about moving, how they promised to move the American embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, and they did that, and that was a big deal. Killing al-Baghdadi, which that was like February or January, which was like 70 years ago, but that was a big story at the time, and important to bring back up because he was a big leader through ISIS, and that was a big deal, but probably most people have forgot about that. And then he talks about destroying the ISIS caliphate, which is not something that we have talked about in a while either, and we probably haven't talked about that because there has been less of an ISIS presence. So
yeah, so two questions.
Sure.
And one is about ISIS, so I'll ask that one first. Is ISIS destroyed? Is it over? Like, it was a big deal 5 years ago, but as you just said, people haven't really been talking about it.
Right. There have been reports that it is popping up in other pockets of the world. North Africa has its Boko Haram / Al Qaeda / ISIS influences. So, but it hasn't been, it's weird to say the word successful about terrorist groups, but they haven't been, heard about in a really long time. So that probably means that either they're covert and not there, or they have been kept at guard to some degree. The fact that we're not talking about it, it is probably because of the coronavirus and everything that goes along with that. There's only so much, air that you could take up with everything, but it doesn't mean, I don't think that means it's completely gone.
Yeah.
But maybe we have to fry.
I think you mentioned this. There's a question: where is Hezbollah?
So where do they operate, or where?
I think that where are they currently operating?
So they're Palestine and Israel. That is kind of their stronghold. Maybe a little bit in Lebanon. There's some idea that everything that happened in Lebanon about a month and a half ago might be tied to them, but that's going to take some investigation, and that's going to take a functioning government in Lebanon because they all sat down and said, we're leaving now. So it's going to be kind of hard for that.
Here's a question about China. And I was wondering the same thing. So because Pence said it and Trump said it last week too, and he's been saying it this week to the press that like China's going to be held responsible for the coronavirus and they're going to like pay for it and we're not going to pay for it. What do you have any sense or have you read anything about what they mean? Like in what ways could any country even hold another country accountable for something like that?
Right. So I would say so. And then today, President Trump released video from, I guess that was the South Lawn, talking about doing that some more, holding China responsible some more. I would say the most effective way of doing that would be either sanctioning them or putting trade barriers up against China to hurt them economically speaking. I don't think anybody is thinking about attacking China because that's just not going to be a good idea. That will be a bigger problem than anybody can handle. So I would think it would be economically more than anything.
Okay.
To answer Alyssa's questions, Kate said, I do teach AP comparative government, and every morning I was watching the BBC at like 5 o'clock in the morning, and they had somebody in one of the towns in China, and I don't remember, and they had put them down a lockdown way before anything was happening here in late January, early February. So they were locking down individual cities. And watching that from here was like, wow, what would that be like? Locking down a whole city? I can't even imagine. And then, couldn't go out for a while. So, but they were locking down individual cities and restricting movement for a really long time in January and early February before we had any sense of anything here. So there was some of that. But then they reopened too in June, July, something like that. So Alyssa, Wuhan has been recovering, but I think there have been pockets of re-ups again. I mean, if you look at what's going on in, my sister lives in France, and the numbers of infections in France are higher now than they ever were in March, April, May. They're in the 14,000 now. Same with Great Britain, UK. There's a lot of places that are being hit particularly hard. And I live in New York City, and parts of New York City are having high cases as well. Yeah. Next. Yeah, next.
Yeah, next, good.
All right, the Supreme Court. Obviously, this is probably topic number 2 at this point. Maybe economy's 2 and Supreme Court's 3. So Harris was saying voters should have say in who fills the seat, the Supreme Court justice seat. As Biden said the week before, people have already started voting. It's not really the time to do that. And she was attacking Trump for packing the federal court with, quote, unqualified judges, because there were some judges that have been put into the federal position that have been approved. It's not Trump just putting them in. The Senate has to approve them they have gotten there. But the ABA, the American Bar Association, and some others have rated these judges as unqualified or lowly qualified. So she was ripping them for that. And he said of the 50 Court of Appeals justices, federal courts of appeal justices that have been appointed under President Trump, 0 have been African American. Pence claimed that Biden and Harris want to pack the court and asked that question repeatedly to Kamala Harris, who did not necessarily answer that question, which is something that will definitely come up in the next, if there's a next debate. We'll get into that. He states that Amy Coney Barrett is a great and loving judge, and he hopes that her religion will not be politicized by Dems, which kind of goes right to the idea of Roe versus Wade. And if and when that comes up. I can briefly explain packing the courts and why some people frown upon it. So it goes back historically to FDR. FDR thought it was unfair that the Supreme Court justices that were around in his time were ruling against him. So he created an idea that, like, for every person that was over, I forget if it was 75 or 80, but of a certain age that was old, he would put 2 of his justices on the Supreme Court. And so that's packing the court with, like, the people who would theoretically vote in favor of his ideology and the things that he brought to the Supreme Court. If Barrett gets in the majority of the court, we'll have a conservative majority, absolutely. The one thing that is pretty tragic about that idea is we have gotten to a place in America where we look at the Supreme Court and we say, well, that's a liberal, that's a conservative, that's a liberal, that's conservative, that's conservative. Whereas they're supposed to be neutral. They're supposed to be not doing that. Unfortunately, you can look at how they've ruled in other cases and pretty much say, okay, because of the way that this person has ruled, they more align themselves with a conservative mentality. And when a president picks a Supreme Court justice to be theoretically nominates a Supreme Court justice to be approved by the Senate, they're doing something called a litmus test, which more science, but this isn't the chemistry version of it, it's the US government version of it, which basically says, this is what I'm looking for, and this person checks the boxes of how they've ruled in other cases. So President Trump knows very well that this is somebody who would rule in favor of court cases that could potentially go to the Supreme Court. Kagan is super liberal, and Clarence Thomas is super conservative. I'm not saying it's wrong to identify that. I think it's wrong to look at the court as a politicized place. They have ruled that way, but Kavanaugh has ruled in favor of the more liberal judges, and Kennedy has done the same. And there have been others that have flipped sides too. So Roberts is definitely neutral, 100%.
Yeah, and there have been some cases in the last year where Trump was like pretty disappointed because he felt like the court didn't rule the way that he would have wanted them to.
Specifically with the tax case where Kavanaugh definitely split, but I think it was 6-3 on that case. So it wasn't even just one, it was 2. So, that comes up and that, that happened.
And like the literal job of the Supreme Court is to figure out whether or not laws are constitutional.
Right.
That's it. So there's no political interpretation of that, and it's like purest intention.
Right. But at the same time, historically, it has always
it ends up functioning.
Political aspect to it. We are definitely paying attention to the Supreme Court much more than probably in the last 10 years. I would say over the last 4 years, we've been paying attention to the Supreme Court a lot more than we used to, which could be good, but also could have its detriments. Going back to
go ahead.
Sorry, going back to the packing the courts and all that happened. What did happen under President Obama in his last year or so, there were vacancies that President Obama was trying to fill, but the Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, who's from Kentucky, is a Republican from Kentucky, since the Republicans controlled the Senate, he put a blockade on hearings, and he was not going to fill those seats, banking on, hopefully for him, a Trump win, so that those seats could be filled by more conservative judges. So that has, been an interesting way of, I don't want to say dealing with it, but dealing with it. Any questions?
I think you answered them, but I'm wondering if you can talk about, like, you talked about how are thinking so much about the Supreme Court and like paying attention to it in the last 5 to 10 years. And that's obviously happening because when they make a decision, that decision is then, it kind of changes, overrides the laws that all of the states have.
Right.
But another way of achieving that is just passing new federal legislation. So could you talk a little bit about that tension?
Yeah. One of the more fascinating facts in this world is that if you poll people, there are more people who believe there are UFOs. There are more percentage-wise. There are more people percentage-wise that believe the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, who collects your taxes, does a good job, than feel that Congress does a good job. So, but there's a problem. I mean, that's a problem in itself. The problem is being, we have this mentality that, well, I didn't elect the bad person in Congress. My congressman, my senator does the right job. It's everybody else. Everybody else picked a bad person.
Mm-hmm.
But everybody thinks that. So that doesn't change things. So there are lots of conservative people who say Nancy Pelosi is a terrible leader. Why would anybody vote for her? But they don't live in San Francisco, so they don't get to vote for her. So the conversation is kind of moot because, well, if you don't like it, move to San Francisco and change that. Same thing with AOC. People definitely don't like her, and they go against her and they say things about her, but they don't live in Queens. You could say the same thing for Mitch McConnell, from Kentucky, a senator from Kentucky, or Matt Gaetz from Florida. I don't know what part of Florida he's from, but I want to say Fort Lauderdale. I could be wrong about that. But so we look at the House of Representatives, we look at the Senate and go, that person is terrible. This group of people is terrible. But the person I elected, no, the person I elected is doing the right thing. And that never changes.
Mm-hmm.
So it gets to this point where, because those people are probably doing good things for you locally,
Mm-hmm.
but when it comes to the federal level, it's a little different, right?
Mm-hmm. So the takeaway is be a judge. Judges are really important. Everyone should be a judge.
Sure.
One thing I'd like to add is people tend to look at their people from their own group as good and that they're doing the right things, and people in the outer group are not doing the right things.
Mm-hmm.
which is that bias can affect who they vote for.
Yeah, and there's there's a lot of people that live in echo chambers,
Mm-hmm.
and will only listen to what their side says, and will only be thinking
This is
about
a little off topic, but we recently studied this unit in psychology called self, and there was a vocabulary word called in-group bias, in which explains the same concept,
Mm-hmm.
where people of their own group appeared as good, while people in the outer group appeared as not good.
Okay.
I thought that was interesting.
Yep, that's right. Yeah. Take AP Psych if you want to learn more about that. It's
absolutely.
real phenomenon. It's a real thing.
Yeah. Any other questions? I kind of see them, but I was going.
I think the only other question is in the Constitution, it doesn't say how many Supreme Court judges there have to be, but
Correct.
We have always had 9. And the only other time I know as a US history teacher that someone tried to pack the courts is when FDR tried to pack the courts.
Right.
And people did not like it.
No.
But in general, it seems like, even though no one has said there has to be 9, it seems like as a culture, people don't really like the idea of court packing or changing the number of judges.
Right.
Do you know why?
Because there's no process to doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So the majority party always wants to do that, but the majority party never stays the same. So at some point in your political affiliation, you will be the minority party. And when you're the minority party, you're definitely like, that should never happen. But as soon as you become the majority party, you're like, yeah, but that's not a terrible idea. I mean, why not?
Right.
You didn't do it. That's your fault.
And before you know it, there's 200 judges on the Supreme Court.
It's just
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I think we're ready for the next one.
Great. So that becomes the Breonna Taylor / race relations / law enforcement idea. So Biden and Harris want to ban chokeholds, eliminate private prisons, and end cash bail. They discussed George Floyd and making a national registry of offenses by police officers. That was something. She does not condone the violence that was seen in the protests over the summer, and talked about decriminalizing marijuana. Pence points to Harris's record as an attorney general in California, in which he claims that Harris incriminated African Americans for nonviolent drug crimes, a while ago. I'm just gonna answer that question real quick about Breonna Taylor. Breonna Taylor was somebody who lived in Tennessee who was asleep, but somebody had called the cops, and it's this is where it gets a little interesting as to why. And then so the boyfriend was there, and somehow the cops fired into the house, and it killed Breonna Taylor, who was sleeping. So she had clearly not done anything wrong, but the boyfriend also fired at the cops. It's unclear which happened first, and going through what happened, they released the tapes, and people are still going through that. They indicted one of the officers on, it was a big topic last week as to what that was called, but not on murder charges, but on like just not doing what you were supposed to do at that time.
Yeah, like putting other people in danger.
Yeah, putting other people in danger because he was like haphazardly shooting away. Yeah, so that's kind of what was going. Yeah, they basically killed Breonna Taylor unintentionally. Yeah, still took a life. Didn't know the life was there. It's a very, some people are very, these people are murderers, they should go away, and there are very much people saying, well, the other guy shot first. They were just trying to protect themselves and figure out how to do that. So it's one of those things that divides America because everybody has their opinion on that. Says the criminal. So he says that the criminal justice system is not evil, and to say that it is wanton endangerment. Thank you, Victoria. And rioting and looting are never justified, and because there was aspects of that during the marches and the protests over the summer to this day. So for those of you unaware, Black Lives Matter is a global organization whose mission is, according to their website, to eradicate white supremacy and build local power to intervene in violence inflicted on Black communities by the state and vigilantes. Over the summer, we did some research into this, and I couldn't have ever guessed this was the number, but 20 million Americans participated in protests for George Floyd in 2,000 cities and towns in every single state and every single territory that the United States has, and also 20 million people just in the US. 60 countries around the world also had protests about this as well. So this was a big deal. So Black Lives Matter, is polar. It's America, so everything's polarizing. Some people will call it a movement. Some people will call it a terrorist group. It can't be one or the other. You have to sit and just really pay attention. Is it Black Lives Matter, people looting and destroying the streets, or is it actors that are not part of that are taking advantage of hazy situations and going in? I can't tell you either way. I would say in some scenarios it's one, in some scenarios it's the other. What that means for an entire organization is different. I might have said terrorist group. Terrorist group might not be 100%, but definitely a group that incites violence.
Yeah, and that was one of Pence's points too.
Yeah.
Like you said here, he brought up looting,
Right.
and looting is something that you see get brought up a lot. But then you
Right.
hear leaders in the movement say, we don't support looting, like you
Right.
were saying, like those people aren't with us. So it's really hazy.
Yeah. And depending on which side of the issue you're on, you're going to support that side of the issue, because that's American politics. So here's some numbers. So the Kaiser Family Foundation is saying that 26 million people protested, 23 million people, 18 million, 15 million. Yeah, so this number was a varied variation of somewhere between 15 and 26 million. So that's where I said 20 million to kind of be on the safe side. But that's a lot of people. That's a lot of people. Any questions in there?
And so these are people who reported that they took part in the protest, like
Right.
intentionally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because nobody's there counting. You know, there's not like a ticket system where it's like, all right, let me buy a ticket to the protest. It's in that large numbers. It's pretty difficult to really figure out how many people are a part of this.
Okay.
Okay, so this is interesting. 538 is a polling. I don't want to say company, but they look at polls from around America, and this is just from last night, so it's very difficult to have the validity of it. But this is showing that females who identify themselves as Democrats say that Harris did very well. Males, to a lesser degree, whereas females, less than anybody else felt that Pence did well, and males thought that Pence did better. That's called the gender gap. If you're studying AP U.S. government right now, you'll know that concept that women tend to support Democrats more. And if you just look at this chart, and this is just from last night, so it's again it's an imperfect poll, but that is a big difference between between women. It is not so big of a difference between the men, but it is a big difference, females in that. Okay. This is another thing that they did. What was the thing you heard about at all? So the debate watchers, share of voters who've said they've seen, read, or heard a lot about the following. So the debate itself, if you watched it, I'm guessing you've heard about it. Like, it's a weird question. The Fly, everybody heard about all you have to do is go on the internet and you can see The Fly. That's the first thing my wife said to me this morning. She slept through the whole thing. She woke up and said there was a fly. And then, about Senator Harris warning Americans with pre-existing conditions that Trump is coming for you. It gets less and less down to the point about Roe versus Wade and whether or not Pence would want Indiana to ban abortion if Roe versus Wade is overturned by the Supreme Court. I saw in the chat before that Roe versus Wade is on the ballot. It is and it isn't. So, there's no place I don't think anybody here is voting except for probably myself and Kate. And if you are, you're 18, good. But Roe versus Wade, good, Krish. It's not on the ballot. There's no place where you could check for Roe versus Wade. But the idea of the Supreme Court being there, and that might have just been somebody, typing and not, being 100% serious, but the idea of the Supreme Court justices and the theory that maybe theoretically they could overturn Roe versus Wade with gaining a new conservative judge is something that is bringing people to the poll, bringing people to vote, and therefore it would be the issue that they vote for. It would be the reason that they vote for, in that scenario, Trump, or if they were, if they wanted to keep Roe versus Wade intact, vote for Biden.
But I think what's important, like an important takeaway that people don't think about, is that Roe versus Wade is on the ballot every year.
Yeah.
Every issue that you care about is on the ballot every year, and it's on your local ballot, and it's on your state ballot, and it's on your federal ballot, because all of these people that you elect, every time you elect them, they have the power to change the laws on the local, state, and federal level, and they have the power to appoint judges who will be judges forever. So that's why it's important to vote every single time, not just when it feels like there's danger of losing something that you care about.
Right. and that's kind of a get out the vote mentality of bringing up Roe versus Wade, because they know that people will react to that. People will say, oh, well, I don't want that to happen. Now I definitely have to come out to vote. Whether or not that's actually going to happen, look, the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court has to go through the writ of certiorari. They have to, the rule of four. They have to, 4 justices have to sit down and say, we are going to take up this case. And to say that there will definitively be 4 justices who look at this anew, I don't know. Maybe that's possible, but I'm not into the fear mongering of that. And as Kate said, this issue comes up every single time and it never gets heard. So to me, it's just, hey, go out and vote, because if you don't, this will happen. I'm not in love with that mentality, but it gets people out to vote. But as a country, we've never passed. We've never gotten 65% of American registered voters to vote. So, at this point, anything, I would love to believe that at this election, it will be 80% of Americans voting. I would not place a bet on that, though.
Yeah, probably not.
Yeah.
But I will be interested to see what percentage vote this year, because there's so many mail-in voting opportunities.
Yeah.
I wonder if that will increase the number.
Yeah, that would be interesting to see. And because of that, I don't think we get those numbers right away anyway. I think that usually takes about a month or so.
I'd like to get something clarified. So I heard from somewhere that Trump was trying to stop mail-in votes so that they don't come in by election day and they don't get counted. Is that true?
So they have petitioned the Supreme Court to look into different states' dealings with that. And just today, the Supreme Court denied the Trump administration's attempt to look at what's going on in Montana regarding that. It doesn't seem as if, the clock is getting really low at this point. So it's too late in a lot of these scenarios to start a court case against mail-in voting and be successful. It's going to be difficult.
Right. And some people over the summer, there was a lot of talk about the Postmaster General, who was a Trump appointed person and allegedly was removing ballot counting machines or mail counting machines that really would be counting absentee ballots. And so that person, I can't think of his name right now, but he had to testify in front of Congress. Yeah. And so there was talk of that too over the summer.
Right. So here's the thing real quick on mail-in voting. If there is a difference of 3 million votes in a state where Republicans have 3 million more votes than Democrats, right? And there are 1.5 million votes, mail-in votes, it doesn't matter. They will still call that for Republicans because those 1.5 million votes cannot make up the difference, right? So when it is close, those states will withhold calling their election. What will happen this year? I don't know. I don't know how long it's going to take. Does that person who wants the Electoral College explained still want that Electoral College?
I'm doing it in the chat.
Okay.
Let's keep going, and if we have time, we can come back to it.
I did that today in class. I love doing the math of that.
That's like a classic history teacher.
Yeah,
question.
I get too
love
excited
that question.
I get too excited about that. So this is just some more math. Harris made 84 attacks, and Pence made this. To me, this looks like reading a boxing card. 84 hits, and Pence made 93. Attacks. That's relatively similar, but the interruptions were different. Harris interrupted 9 times, whereas Pence interrupted 16 times.
What is an attack? Like, do you know how they define attack?
Yeah, I think any negative statement made about, I would imagine in this, because it's the vice presidential debate, the vice president or their fellow ticket person, the president or the
Okay.
person running for president. That's what I would believe. So today, the Committee on Presidential Debates, the CPD, announced that the next election, the next debate will be virtual because of President Trump's corona testing and that. And Trump almost immediately said, "I'm not taking part in that." So we might have a next debate. I hope we have a next debate. I'm a fan of debates, but we might not. I hope to see you because that would be great, but we don't know just yet.
Yeah,
But
we'll be watching it and we'll see.
Yeah, yeah. This class, AP US Gov, AP Comp Gov, does not exist without current events. So it is. We are, unfortunately, us AP US Gov or AP Comp Gov people are tied to our phones all day long looking at the news. It is fun stuff.
Could you do what is the Electoral College in 2 minutes?
I could do what is the Electoral College in 2 minutes.
Good.
The Electoral College, it is, you get a number, and that number, the lowest number it could be is 3. You definitely have 2 senators. Every state has 2 senators. Every state has 1 House of Representatives. We're going to talk about 48 of those states right now because Maine and rank choice, please don't. Maine and Nebraska are different. Just understand that they're different. But every other state, let's say there's 10 people in the state of New York. Yeah, New York. If 6 people vote Democrat and 4 people vote Republican, it doesn't matter. 6 people is more than 4, and therefore the entirety of the Electoral College for electoral vote goes to the Democrats because they had more. And in New York, our number is 29. You need 270 votes, electoral votes from states to win the presidency. Excuse me, the greatest website to go to is 270towin.com because you could play around if you love maps and love politics. I don't know what else is greater than that. You can go around and play with that and see what people are predicting, what polls are saying, or just play with it yourself and say, oh, what happens if this happens? What happens if you spend way too much time on that website? But that's happened. Nebraska and Maine, please don't make me.
We don't have to go into Nebraska and Maine. I'll answer this question and then we'll wrap up. So Alyssa said, why not just count the popular vote? And that's a great question. So the founding fathers actually wrote about this extensively. Hamilton is one of the people who wrote about it. You can look it up. And they basically said that they were afraid that the uneducated masses might not choose someone who was actually fit for the job. And so their original intention was to have sort of a protective barrier, just in case. And now the sort of reasoning is well, the Electoral College represents proportionally the amount of say that each state should get based on their population. And so it seems like a fair way to divide it up. But there are lots of people, especially in the last 5 to 10 years, who say maybe that is not fair anymore. Maybe that doesn't make sense anymore. Right. So there are movements right now to change it.
Yeah, but if it went to popular vote, nobody would go to Montana to, try and get those people's votes. Nobody would go to North Dakota, South Dakota. You wouldn't go to low population states because theoretically that's not going to make a difference.
Right, essentially the votes of people in those states would feel like they didn't matter.
Yeah.
And so that's what people are trying to avoid.
And because of that, Republicans are never going to agree to that because higher populations, cities tend to vote Democrat.
Right.
And
yeah, Krish is crushing it in the chat.
Yeah. Good stuff, Krish. So it's going to be a hard. I don't think you can go just to popular vote if you were going to change it. You'd have to come up with some other formula, and I don't know. You're right; they have lower turnout, but they do have turnout. And in the last, in 2000, or 2016 is a good example. Hillary Clinton got more votes, but lost the Electoral College because of the whole, of the way it is. That's what that's according to our Constitution, according to everything. That's fair that happened. Is that representative of our country is a whole different debate.
Right.
which I don't think we have time for.
We do not, because we are out of time.
Yes.
But thank you so much, everyone, for coming. This
Yes,
was so
absolutely.
great. I hope we
I
get
have
to do it
one
next
question.
week. Sorry, we don't have time. Send an email.
Okay.
But I hope we get to do it next week, and
Same.
we'll send out emails. We'll keep an eye on what's going on, and we'll keep you all updated. And thank you so much to Sean for turning this around in like 12 hours, just like last week. This was super helpful.
Yeah, no worries.
Have a good night, everybody.
Have a good night.
Bye.
Bye-bye.